Hello students, today we begin part A of our two-part series on the French Revolution. In this part we will learn what started the revolution, how French society was organized, and why ordinary people became angry enough to rebel. Keep your notebooks ready, we'll go step by step. Let's start with a day everyone remembers, 14 July 1789. Imagine Paris in the early morning, tense, noisy, full of rumors. The king had ordered troops into the city. People were terrified. Rumors spread that the army might be used to shoot the citizens. About 7,000 men and women gathered near the town hall. They decided to form a people's militia, a kind of community army to protect themselves. Looking for weapons, they broke into some government buildings. A group of several hundred marched to the eastern part of the city and reached the Bastille, a large stone fortress that served as a prison. People believed the Bastille held a store of ammunition and gunpowder. After a violent fight, the commander of the Bastille was killed and the prisoners were freed. Interestingly, there were only 7 prisoners inside. So, why did this matter so much? It wasn't the number of prisoners. The Bastille stood for something much bigger. It was the symbol of kingly power and oppression. To the people, it represented the king's ability to lock away anyone he wanted without fair trials. So, when the Bastille fell, it was not just a military victory, it was a symbolic defeat of royal repression. People celebrated wildly. The fortress was demolished and its stones were sold as souvenirs, a sign that the people had reclaimed their power. Historians later looked back and saw this as the real beginning of French Revolution. But most people at the time did not imagine that events would lead to the execution of a king. To understand how this could happen, we must look at the long-term problems in French society. Let's meet the main characters of French society before the revolution. In 1774, Louis XVI became King of France. He was 20 years old and married to Marie Antoinette. When Louis became king, he found an empty treasury. That means the royal money box was almost empty. Why? Two big reasons. Long years of war had drained the country, and the royal court at Versailles was extremely expensive to maintain. France had also helped the 13 American colonies fight Britain. Helping the American colonies cost France over 1 billion livres. Before that, France already owed more than 2 billion livres, so the debt was enormous. Because of these debts, lenders charged high interest, around 10%, and a large part of the royal budget went to pay interest alone. The government had to find money to pay for the army, the court, offices, universities, everything. So the king had to raise taxes. But the way society was organized made this very, very unfair. Society was divided into 3 states. This is called the old regime. First state, the clergy, church leaders, priests, bishops. Second state, the nobility, lords, nobles, people with titles. And third state, the rest of the people, peasants, laborers, artisans, shopkeepers, merchants, lawyers, small officials, basically everyone else. Peasants made up nearly 90% of the population, yet about 60% of the land was owned by the nobles, the church, and some richer members of the third estate. Many peasants did not even own the land they worked on. Now, the most important and unfair fact: only members of the third estate paid taxes to the state. The first and second estates were largely exempt from taxes. In addition, The church collected a tax called the tithe from the peasants. The nobles collected feudal dues, money, produce, or labor extracted from peasants. The peasants also paid the tithe, a direct tax, and a number of indirect taxes on everyday goods like salt and tobacco. Peasants were often forced to do unpaid work for their lords, from working in the lord's field to building roads. All the cost of running the estate was therefore placed mainly on the third estate. This created deep resentment. Between 1715 and 1789, France's population grew from about 23 million to 28 million. More people meant more mouths to feed, but food production did not increase enough. The supply of grains could not keep up with the rising demand. Bread was the staple food for most people. When grain was short, the price of bread rose quickly. Wages of workers were set by workshop owners and did not keep pace with rising prices, so ordinary families could buy less and less. When a bad harvest came because of drought or hail, the situation became serious. People faced what economists call a subsistence crisis, a situation where people could barely survive because food was expensive or scarce. Such crises occurred frequently under the old regime and created constant tension. Let me give you one clear picture. A peasant paid tithe to the church, feudal dues to the lord, taxes to the state, and often a range of indirect taxes when buying salt, tobacco, or other essentials. If the harvest failed, the peasants had to sell grain and still pay the dues. This left most peasants near the margin of survival. At the same time, the rich lived in comfort at Versailles. This growing gap between the poor and the rich increased anger and made people more ready to take action. Not everyone in the third estate was poor. Within it, a new middle class was growing. Merchants, manufacturers, lawyers, doctors, and officials. They earned money from trade, from manufacturing textiles like wool and silk, and from profession. This middle class was educated. They could read books and discuss ideas. They began to think differently. Why should someone be powerful simply because of birth? Why shouldn't ability and hard work decide a person's position? New political ideas from philosophers inspired them. John Locke argued against the divine right of kings and for natural rights. Jean-Jacques Rousseau spoke of the social contract, the idea that government exists because the people agree to them. Montesquieu suggested separating power into three parts: a legislature, an executive, and a judiciary, so that power could not be abused. These thinkers were not just in books, their ideas were discussed in salons, which were gatherings in rich people's homes and in coffee houses. Newspapers and pamphlets spread these ideas further, and they were often read aloud for those who could not read. The educated middle class began to demand merit and fairness. When they heard that the king planned to raise more taxes to pay off debts, they felt this would only make the poor suffer more while the rich remained privileged. So anger grew in both the cities and the countryside. People who could not read learned about political ideas through newspapers and public readings. The news that Louis XVI might collect more taxes spread anger widely, and this combination of economic hardship, unfair taxes, and new political ideas created a situation where many people felt change was necessary. So, While the storming of the Bastille was the dramatic beginning, the real causes had been building for decades. Deep debt, an unfair social order, food shortage, and new ideas about liberty and equality. Let's quickly summarize what we have learned in this part. 14 July 1789. The Bastille was stormed. This was a symbol of people's rising power. France faced a severe financial crisis, debts from wars, and an expensive royal court. Society was organized into three states under the old regime. The third state bore all taxes. A growing population and poor harvest caused bread prices to rise, creating repeated subsistence crises. An educated middle class embraced Enlightenment ideas, equality, rights, and rule of law, and began demanding change. All these things together set the stage for the next step, political action. In part B, we will see how the States General met, how the third state created the National Assembly, how feudal privileges were abolished, how a constitution was written, and how events moved France from a monarchy toward a republic. See you there, and remember, understanding the reasons help us understand the events. Let me know in the comments if this video helped you remember the events, and tell me in the comments if you want more of it. You can watch Hindi explanation of the chapter as well, and don't forget to subscribe for the next part.